morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends, specifically Jesse from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. They're here digitally recording us in high definition for broadcast in high definition on Solaris Channel 3, or in standard definition on Charter Channel 985, or in high definition all the time, on demand, 24 hours a day at WisconsinRapidsCommunityMedia.com. And you're going, why are they here, Carl? Well, it's because it's time for our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl.
Okay. Common Council night last night, and the meeting barely gets started, and an alderman moves to have it adjourned. Tom Rayom, folks might have heard the story I did. He went on, and he was upset. I think what I gathered from it, okay, I couldn't get my minutes when I wanted to on Friday, and then we have these meetings that happen on the day of the council, and I think he just voiced some frustration. And James Stack, Alderman Stack, also asked the city attorney after everything had been settled out, could you look into this and give the council some advice on this whole issue? Your thoughts? Does he have a legitimate complaint? Is there a way sounded like someone that's getting overburdened and he's not getting enough time to study, do his homework.
I think there were a lot of things that were converging on Tom's opinions and feelings last night. I think the first of which, it's important to note that we email, the clerk's office, I should say, emails all council members and the public the packets for council meetings on Fridays. And sometimes it gets out late Thursday. So council members get it on Friday. Some prefer to pick up a paper packet, and I believe it was the clerk's office intention to have a paper packet available for council members on Friday, but didn't happen. So the clerk took care of the issue and hopefully has remedied it for future, and that will not happen again. But Tom also had some concerns about the Airport Commission meeting, which he thought was a special meeting, or emergency meeting, I should say, when it was purely, there's been a lot of activity out at the airport, and really folks have been pressuring the commission to have multiple meetings because of the amount of items we've had on our agendas, that it's some of the other commissioners have commitments after our meetings on Thursdays. So in an attempt to split up our meetings, we've had multiple meetings a month, thereby splitting up some of the discussion and some of the items that we have to get through. So I spoke with Tom this morning, had conversation, clarified a number of things, indicated that none of this stuff is on fast track. In fact, the Finance and Property Committee meeting last night, oftentimes they will stack meetings. I mean, our committee meetings the first Tuesday of the month are always stacked between HR, Finance and Property, and Public Works. For convenience. These folks, many of which are working professionals, they have to work around their work schedules and their personal schedules. So last night there was another meeting at the Finance and Property Committee right before the council meeting, and really a pretty straightforward agenda. We have multiple budget meetings every year to afford the public, but afford the council the opportunity to ask staff and I questions about the preparation of the budget and where things stand. So I think Tom and I are on the same page, and there's some clarity that Mr. Rayom wanted from me, and I believe we've achieved that. Okay.
Does he get email, or is he just someone that's...
I can't say if all of them read their emails. There's this nice feature of a read receipt, and I'll tell you, I don't often get read receipts back on memos and things I send. So I can't say it's a one-way communication if I push it out and it's not responded to or read.
Okay, so that's what. Then let's talk a little bit, just because I want to make sure everybody understands that when the council approved the resolution changing the city's polling places to just 2. And this is for 2017, and the reason Wisconsin Rapids School District advised the city some time ago that for security reasons, they didn't want to have polling happening in the schools anymore.
That's correct.
And that's been common across the country, quite honestly, and for that very reason. So it was decided the Centralia Center and Woodlands Church we're going to be. Now, I'm going to anticipate super secularists going, how can you have a polling place in a church? Well, if people remember, that used to be a mall.
In fact, it's common. Some municipalities around the state have polling places in gathering fellowship halls just because of the space and the logistics. They're handicapped accessible. Oftentimes they meet much of the criteria, or all of the criteria if they're an active polling place, for state standards for polling places. And so we wanted to maintain at a minimum 2 polling places within the city. There isn't any sort of requirements at the state level set forth in terms of number of polling places to the number of voters. So the intent of the clerk was to balance that process, but also to find ways to make our polling places more efficient, because knowing that we've all voted at our polling place for some time, and we all know that there's times when there's been delays and things have taken longer than maybe we'd like them to have. So by having 2 polling places and 2 voting tabulation machines, the idea is that the elections process will be much more efficient. Now, of course, there's a lot of steps in the process. There's a lot of voter laws that have changed that require the poll workers to do so many different verifications to ensure that there's no voting fraud on election day. So that in and of itself slows the process down. But we believe that by having the 2 polling places, and one being in the Woodlands Church, it's actually right in the hallway.
In the hallway, yeah.
Enter the old mall, the Shopko Mall when it was. And so there'll be the polling places in there, and folks will be able to queue and leave appropriately. It's nice and wide, and there'll be ability for polling workers to be very comfortable, and then those that are waiting to vote, just to make sure that it's not crowded and there isn't a high concentration of people that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the other one, the Centralia Center, will be in the main hallway, and again, and it says one of the things you'll avoid these long lines that you sometimes have had on bigger election days in some of these smaller locations, and it would help with tabulating.
Yeah.
With merging all these different. If you're just dealing with 2 places, it's a lot easier then, and you're going to save some money.
Yeah, and sometimes there's discrepancies between the tabulation machine and the number of, most of the time it's a human error, but those things take time to sort out. So by having 2 polling places, you have less frequency for errors. And so hopefully folks that have been maybe frustrated with the time it takes for the city to tabulate its results will be able to do so quicker in the future, and so everyone will be happy.
But this November, this is the last election that you will go to either Grove, Howe, or Meade Elementary School.
That's correct.
But then, you can say, so farewell, this will be it. But you can vote right now. I want to make sure, as a result of that recent court ruling, is that, hey, no, you got to allow early voting. Early voting started already and is going on at City Hall. I've talked to some friends who've done so and said it went really smooth.
It's a non-event. In fact, I walked out with the lady the other day. She's 96. She showed up to City Hall, wanted to vote early just to get it out of the way, not have to avoid crowds, or to be able to avoid crowds on Election Day. And I'll tell you, I voted early. It's a nice thing just to have over with. This election, I think, has really weighed on a lot of people's stressors, and so it's nice to just be able to have that. It's great to be able to vote on Election Day, don't get me wrong, but it feels good to just be able to have it over with. And so I'd encourage people to go to City Hall during business hours. If you're registered, you can vote anytime. If you're not registered, there are a couple of windows of time where you won't be able to vote, just because we need to make sure that somebody's deputized at the window to be able to register folks. And there's a window on Friday this week. Otherwise, people can vote up to the Friday right before the election.
Okay, so if that's what, say this is the last presidential debate, and you say, I'm going to watch the last debate and I'm going to make my decision, you can go vote tomorrow.
That's right.
Yeah, so
just have it over with.
Yeah, okay. You gave a report, and since it's something that people are going to be watching for, you mentioned during your report to the council. By the way, our phone lines are open at 715-424-2600 if you want to talk to Mayor Vruwink this morning. The demolition of Good Time Charlie's, a.k.a. the Labor Temple. I guess that process has already begun.
That's correct. So there is a deadline for demolition of the 15th of December. But there is a number of pre-work activities that need to occur, and that is partially with asbestos and removal of asbestos in there. It's not a lot, but it needs to be removed. And then there will be salvaging of materials that remained in the building. So the contractor that we selected has begun doing some of that work, and will continue through the fall here and into December 15th. So we haven't really gotten a firm contract schedule from them, or a contractor schedule from them as to when certain events may happen, but we know that they're held to a deadline of the 15th of December.
I was thinking too, with the demolition of that large size of a building, you may need to have to block off Jackson Street near there at times.
Right.
When they're they're not planning any implosions or anything. Just
not to our knowledge.
No.
Yeah,
Okay. But basically, even if you're just whacking it down, there's going to be times when you might want to have to close certain streets for safety reasons.
Correct, especially if it creates dust or visibility concerns of some of the thoroughfares there. Correct.
Okay. So once you get that, and through various means, we'll find out and can let people know.
Certainly.
A lot of people are going to be maybe sentimental about seeing that building going down. Pam and I will be. For you folks that don't know, when Pam and I were married, our reception was held at the top of that building. That's when it was the Labor Temple.
There's some unique character to the building, and actually Chuck Belke, when we closed on the property, brought by some video footage and actually a very large portrait of the building when it was first constructed. So it's kind of neat to see its place in time, but obviously the city needs economic development, we need job creation, and we certainly are. Those are the two primary motivators for us in buying that property and packaging it for redevelopment.
Okay, once it's cleaned out and that site is ready, what happens next? And I understand there's been companies or development firms going, we're interested. How is that? Is there going to be a bid process? How is this going to be done?
Good question. So another piece of due diligence that has to happen right after the building is torn down is the city was awarded a state grant a couple of months ago for $150,000 to begin what's called site assessment. So once the building is torn down, we'll verify for certainty what, if any, contamination exists, and then if there's any remedial action that needs to occur. So there might be soil removals. Let's say we know there's some petroleum from the former gas station located next door. So we're going to make sure that none of that petroleum contamination plume or migrated to underneath the foundation of the building. So that'll happen yet this winter. We also need to do some underground soil borings to determine the extent of which we can accommodate underground parking. We know that if we're going to achieve, whether it's a housing development or any office space in the development, we'll need to offer some sort of on-site parking. And the intent is to not have more surface parking in the downtown, is to actually have it under the building, as you see in many, many developments of the sort here today.
Oh yeah, or Aspires Riverview with the tower.
Right.
Right underneath.
Yep, first floor surface parking that way under the building, exactly. Yeah. So we need to do that. We know there's a lot of granite outcroppings. We see now the river being so low. It's amazing the amount of granite kind of just outcroppings that's just anywhere.
Yeah, because they're doing maintenance on the dams and the like.
Correct, yeah. So once we finish the soil borings, we'll know to the extent we can have underground parking. That's an outstanding question mark. We also last week held another planning call with prospective developers because we issued what's called an RFQ, a request for qualifications. So at this stage, the phase would be to solicit development partners. Oftentimes they will formulate teams of an architect, a builder, a planner, and anybody else that would be associated with that group to put together a development proposal for the city. So the plan is on October 31st will be the first initial deadline for that RFQ. And our hope is we'll have a number of proposals to consider. They will not be, here's what we want to build there, or what we think you should build there, that type of thing. It's, okay, here's our qualifications, here's who might be our development team, here's our past projects and our success, and then we vet them and discuss with them. And then following that process, so if we have a good showing on the 31st of October, we may issue an RFP, and that's a request for proposals. So at that, it's a much more refined, focused stage that will engage with developers to tell us exactly what they think the site can bear, both the market and based on our vision and conceptual thoughts this far.
They'll tell you, realistically, folks, this is what you can do with this property.
Correct. Yep. Okay. And so that may happen. We may issue an RFP in November, December, but we've also left ourselves the ability to issue it after December. So we have kind of a second review of RFQs. a lot of folks and a lot of communities are doing this right now, so it's a busy time for proposers or developers to put together teams. So granted, we've had a lot of discussions with many of these, so there's a high level of awareness about it, but again, based on project levels and 2017 projects, they may be too busy to respond.
Okay, so yeah, I was going to say, this is the time of year when they're thinking about next year's construction schedule.
And 2018.
And 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to, okay, well, keep us in the loop, but we're working on this right now.
Yeah, and many of the state and federal programs, their funding cycles are April next year. So if we were to secure a development partner, which we would hope to be able to do something yet late this year and early next year, we may be able to vie for whether it's low income housing tax credits or whether it's new market tax credits or any of the other state and federal programs, which ultimately we hope to leverage in the project. It's going to be very a delicate process to align with some of those funding cycles to ultimately break ground.
Once you have that development partner, and this is subject to approval by the Common Council,
Correct.
we should make sure that the public understands. It's not like you're going to say, okay, no, the council will be in on this, they'll deliberate it and say, yeah, go with this person or this group to be our development partner. What is their relationship then with the city, so our listeners and viewers can understand how this works? Because this can get kind of complicated for folks.
Sure. Well, I would say it's none of it's final until the commitments are made by both parties. So we may select a development partner, we may work through due diligence and planning and a lot of negotiation, because it is a downtown development that oftentimes requires a lot of creative financing and a lot of creative thought, and so things are delicate until the very end. So we wouldn't, until the shovels are in the ground, is it final. And so there are a lot of stories about projects and developers that have just fallen through for many reasons. But in this situation, we feel very strongly that there's a housing demand of which the city has not met, and downtown in particular. And there's also a need for development in the city. And I think not only the council's appetite to buy and package properties and redevelop and clear the site, but also state and federal financing mechanisms that might align perfectly for us to leverage a development partner. So we really want a development partner that has knowledge and success and experience in working with similar like projects.
Okay.
And we suspect we'll have a couple to choose from. Now, of course, that all remains to be seen until the 31st of October. But our intent is to ultimately sell the property to a developer, because that's when we'll achieve the tax increment, the tax base increment. Of course, there's all the benefits to the community, whether it's new businesses or new housing options, but we certainly want the tax increment and the growth in our tax base.
Okay, so then the city eventually sells that to the developer. They build what everybody has been dreaming about and that they say is realistic, and we move on from there. Are there other buildings in that area that still need to be taken out, for lack of a better term?
I think it depends on who you ask. I mean, there are some that have really poor facades that some have just recently sold. And so I think there's good bones there. I mean, we bought East Town Plaza, for example. That's a real small project that, depending on when we can finish up our construction season, which our guys have been very ambitious in dealing with many projects that have kind of cropped up, as you've seen around the city. We hope that we can do the demolition of East Town Plaza and follow a similar process. We do a request for qualifications, issue an RFP to ultimately select who the developers might be, or developer might be, that we select to rehab that project and bring that back to life for the downtown and for the city.
Could you see similar companies competing for both projects? Or?
Yeah, a different scale. One of the folks that called in on our planning call last week has done a lot of smaller projects around the state, and they like those because they're also what's called a CDFI, so they're kind of a community bank. And so they're able to finance startup businesses and such. And so that's much more in their wheelhouse. Now, they have done some larger projects too, but fewer of them. So we sense that, plus there's a lot of local talent, and a smaller project might fit better in their wheelhouse and their budget.
Okay, I was going to ask you, will there be a role for local contractors or local craftsmen and the like in these projects.
Most definitely. In fact, one of the questions that the developer asked was, or prospective developer asked was, what's the requirement for local trades? And while we didn't build anything in the RFQ, it could be included in the RFP that within a certain mile radius that the talent and workforce must come from. At the same time, though, a lot of the development partners, like Myron, if they work with one of these teams or somebody else, or Ellis or Altman, they're employing a lot of local people. So kind of inherently that we expect that there will be local workforce ultimately working on the project, which would be a great thing.
Okay, so if everything goes up, let's say everything works smoothly, when might we actually start seeing shovels in the ground?
Ambitiously and optimistically, I think, but I would question realistically if it's the case. Maybe next fall, if stars align. Otherwise, it's likely spring of 2018 at this point, if in fact we need to rely on federal and state funding sources. If a developer comes in and says, you don't need any of that, we can cash flow it with X, Y, and Z factors, they could build it in the spring or fall of next year. Or begin construction at that point.
Okay, that'd be nice if we could find someone like that.
It really would be.
Yeah.
But the market is tepid at best, and there's some soft sort of elements of our market. The housing component obviously is very strong, so if that's a dominant factor of the entire development, let's say housing ends up being 70% of the rentable or the purchasable space and 30% is retail or commercial, there's a possibility that could carry the development. And the retail and commercial is kind of a byline then, and it just takes off when the timing is right.
And then another question I've heard folks discuss, well, why not? Why did the city and the council decide now was the time to do all this and you probably have heard this maybe from folks. Just a simple question, why now? Well,
simple response is we can't stand still, right? And
they also had a building that's really old and not going to get any easier to tear down if it has environmental issues or other issues.
Yeah, and that's really the basics of community development. Is you could stand there and the city could stand idly by and watch things just decrepitly fall apart and just it doesn't share a vision or a feeling of a positive direction for a community when you just allow your buildings to just deteriorate, especially those that have major issues, whether they're structural or contamination or just lack of occupancy. Sometimes that's just enough. It really doesn't do well for the attitude and what people feel about a community.
And with it being downtown by the river, I would think that's a huge marketing asset.
I'll tell you, that's been the number one thing that these outside developers have said. Talk about an asset that is underutilized in this community, and so it's a real strong validation of our belief. We just hope that the proposals come back and indicate that there's true interest in partnering with the city on that development.
Well, for the rest of us, if we see a developer in town looking around the river and be nice to them, be friendly, welcome them to the area.
Encourage them to spend their money.
That's right. Encourage them to spend their money. Say, we're glad you're here. That's what we can all help in this process.
That's right.
We have to take our first break, but hey, the phone lines are open if you have a question, and it doesn't have to be on the stuff that we're talking about. You might have something that you think is very mundane, but it's important to you. Now, this is the mayor's radio listening session. He wants to hear about it. So give us a call at 715-424-2600. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. Again, we welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Media in the studio today as well.
Good morning and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. They're digitally recording this for later broadcast on the Charter and Solaris cable systems, or you can get it on demand 24 hours a day at WisconsinRapidsCommunityMedia.com in beautiful high definition, and you can see why I say I have a face for radio. Okay, let's And we're doing our monthly, the reason why they're here, by the way, is Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here, and it's his listening session, so if you have any issues that you would like to talk to the mayor about, 715-424-2600 is the number to call. Budget time.
Mm-hmm. Lovely time of year.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
Comes around every time this time of year.
Okay, well, since when you first became mayor, you started doing something called activity-based budgeting, and now that system. How is that working for you, and how does that affect you putting together your budget? And give us a little early peek at what the city is facing.
Well, activity-based budgeting primarily was for department heads to be able to define the activities of which they're going to utilize their cost allocation. So if it's in parks, for example, what's the cycle of which it takes mowers to mow all the greenways around the city, and how does that dollar figure back into their budget requests? So the departments that have activities, such as all the public works departments, all of which have been utilizing activity-based budgeting now. So we define exactly, nearly precisely, on the amount of chip sealing we're going to do on certain streets for maintenance. It also really helps us manage and adequately prepare for the quantities of which we inventory certain things. So if we're buying aggregate again for chip sealing, it's obviously an evolution and it's a work in progress, because not everything is equal, especially on construction projects. Our estimating between engineering and streets continues to get refined, but not everything environmentally, when you're replacing a street on the west side of the river or the east side of the river, not all of your costs per unit are the same, because you've got different soil conditions, and you've got certain situations where there might be water tables issues that you've got to deal with. So I would say that the activity-based budgeting continues to be an important part of what we do in terms of preparation, planning for our activities in the next year. But this year's budget has really been faced with a lot of challenges in terms of preparation, because as we often talk about on our show, local government and municipalities and even school districts are all beholden to levy limits, and that's the state-imposed revenue caps of which locals and officials around the state have to prepare their budgets within certain constraints. And that formula is based on net new construction. And our net new construction is the sum of all of the construction in a community in a given year, less the amount of demolition or anything that's been taken off the tax rolls. So our net new construction number this last year is 0.65%. And so what that means is our tax levy, the portion of our budget that is derived from property taxes, which is about 43% of our total budget, is derived from people paying a portion of their property taxes to the city, funds our operations. And then the rest of our budget is funded by special fees and revenues that we might receive from the state if it's transportation aids, things like stormwater utility fees. We offer an ambulance service, so we provide we receive ambulance revenue, and the like. So this year's budget has been really very challenging to balance based on the amount of requests that have been received to perform certain functions that the departments wish to do in 2017, and the state revenue cap that we have. So our budget at 0.65% translates into $72,000 of which our budget can grow for 2017. So in a $34 million budget, if you're given an incremental growth of $72,000 and you have to perform the same level of service and absorb any health insurance cost increases or any wage increases or any changes in workmen's compensation rates, it is nearly impossible to do so without finding areas in the budget that need to be reduced. So while it's our primary goal to provide a budget that maintains service, it's been very challenging, and I've empowered a number of department heads to look deeper in their budget to be able to come up with cost savings for next year to balance the budget. So as of yesterday, we stand with about a $473,000 budget gap of a $12 million levy. So that's the portion, again, that's funded from property taxes, local property taxes. So we intend to do two things: raise revenues where we can. So there will be an increase proposed in the budget that will increase ambulance rates in a couple of the rate classes. We have not had rates increases in our ambulance service in many years. in the stormwater utility fee. That's the fee that folks pay if they've got parking lots and impervious surfaces that are for stormwater issues. They pay $30 per equivalent residential unit today. There will be an increase proposed in that stormwater utility fee, as well as other fees, because there's no way for us to be able to operate a budget we have to propose a balanced budget, first of all. And the second piece to that is for departments to dig deeper in their requests to find cost savings or eliminate costs within their budget.
And then you get into deferring things sometimes. And sometimes that's not a good idea because you might have something that needs to be repaired or fixed or removed right away. Is this going to change any plans what are going to be what are your administration's top priority items in your budget?
On deferment, case in point, there are two major capital projects for street reconstruction that are being considered in the budget for 2017. First of which is First Street North, which would take it from Riverview Lane up by Buren to the city limits, the Buren city limits. That's a major capital project. Primarily driving that project is the wastewater infrastructure beneath the surface, as well as a lift station, which sends that treatment or the waste to the treatment plant. That's a major capital project. The other major capital project that we're looking at doing is on Washington Street, but on the part of Washington Street that starts on 8th, down by 8th Street.
Okay.
So it's sort of in a residential neighborhood. The sanitary sewer in that area is in very poor condition, and so in a deferment situation, it's likely we're going to have to pare back that project a couple of blocks. So instead of doing the 5 or so blocks that we intend to do, we may end up doing 3 or 4. And so,
are you taking a risk if you say that system's kind of bad already? Are you taking a risk doing that?
Most definitely, but at the expense of the inability to not pass a budget that's not balanced. We're left with zero ability to do anything else unless we were to completely eliminate, let's see, concrete pavement patching like we've experienced on 34 North, 1334 North this year. Projects like that we'd really have to defer, so collectively, that's about the least risky project to defer. Therefore, enabling us and the public works staff to have some confidence in saying, you know what, we can pare that reconstruction back a little bit and perform that last piece in the subsequent year.
Okay.
So as far as other priorities go, obviously just performing basic services like we continue to do. We hope that the changeover in our recycling program will generate more recyclables and divert some of the product that we're currently paying the landfill and tipping fees for. So hopefully our operating budget will have better performance next year in that area. But overall, the budget is very stagnant, very flat, primarily due to the lack of new construction in the community, which drives our top-line budget.
Beyond those fees, what does it mean for a property tax rate?
Well, the property tax rate is being held because of the fact that on the operating side, now we will have to borrow as we do for our capital improvements for street reconstruction. We plan to borrow for aquatics and other highway rehab projects. So therefore, there will be an uptick in that area, but we don't know the impact at this point for borrowing yet.
Okay, why don't we get to our first phone call? Good morning, you're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Yeah, speaking of roads, I had the opportunity of going through the intersection on Chestnut and 8th Street yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I was totally shocked to see that there's, going north and south, there's left turn lanes. I thought there was probably going to be a left turn signal on either direction because now all the traffic is being funneled that's going north or south down to one lane. So if you got cars turning to the right in either direction, everything gets slowed way down. I went through there close to lunchtime, and believe me, there already was, we were getting backed up because of the slowdown of the traffic. And I can't even imagine, like, when you have fireworks or a ball game or, whatever downtown, and you got this enormous gush of cars coming through there, how long those lines are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Can you?
I think that was an atrocity to do that. I mean, what was wrong with putting a left turn signal, and yet people could then continue, still have 2 lanes of traffic going both directions.
Okay. I mean, what's your answer?
Well, I would say in the short term it's going to take some adjustment, and I drove through it for the first time last night, and I was surprised to see how it actually worked. But I do need to point out that this was a state Department of Transportation project. It was a highway safety improvement grant that the state decided that intersection, after the data and the crash data, indicated that this improvement would eliminate or reduce crashes significantly.
This was the state's idea, not...
This is correct. It was completely designed and implemented by state and the state's contractors.
So if she has some concerns and wants to voice some frustrations, maybe she should call up the local DOT office.
Most definitely. They were the folks that had been designing and ultimately implemented the improvements there based on the crash data. Again, this is the number of rear-end collisions. There is something to be said about the positive offset, and that means so for example, if you come off of 66 on 13 or 34 and you take a left toward the city, they have the positive offset of that right turn lane because of the amount of crashes and T-bones if you're taking a left turn onto 1334 South. So I will agree with the engineers and the experts on this, that this will ultimately make an improvement at that intersection, particularly when we have high traffic events such as ball games and when the aquatic center opens up. You're going to have a lot of left turn movements at that intersection, particularly to the west, and you're going to need positive offset as well as the arrows that were introduced there, the flashing yellows, to be able to get folks to where they're headed safely.
But the bottom line, though, when it came to this is what the state says, this is what we're going to do, and that's what they did.
Correct.
Well, the state isn't always. How many times have they redone projects in the city because the state doesn't? I think the proof in the pudding is going to be as people start getting backed up there, and there's going to be me saying something to the state isn't going to amount to a hill of beans. I mean, the city, when you have all kinds of backups there and whatever, I guess then the city will go to the DOT and say, listen, I can see where there was a left-hand, there was probably needed a left turn signal, but then, the rest of the traffic, you still had you could have 2 lanes of traffic flowing both north and south there. So, sure. Whatever, I guess we'll all wait and see what happens.
That's it.
And then they can redo it again probably to use more taxpayer money. Thank you.
Thanks for the opinion.
Okay. We got to take a quick break, and then we'll be back to wrap up this edition of the Morning Magazine. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine, and we also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, because Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink has been here this morning, and you still have an opportunity for those of you wanting to get on over the back fence. First off, you can't get on early anyway, but so let the folks who want to talk to their mayor do so. It's 715-424-2600. Since we're talking about traffic patterns, etc., etc., what's the latest on the plans for the new Kwik Trip over across from the chamber office and over there?
Sure. So all the real estate transactions have closed, and so at this point, all the property is held and owned by Kwik Trip. The combination of the parcels, that all has occurred, and the intent, as I understand, is to begin demolition in the spring and then construction right thereafter. So they still are on track to open next year, and they didn't plan to do any major construction or any demolition yet this year, but that project is still a go, and they still plan to do their work next spring.
Before that construction begins, are there any other studies or any other work the city will have to do to prepare for that?
Well, one of the requirements we had with the developer, in this case Kwik Trip, was to do a traffic analysis at that intersection of Expressway and Lincoln Street. And out of that traffic analysis, we indicated that there had to be some improvements at the intersection to minimize queuing and to not create an overflow of people, if it's a left turn movement, for example, into the through lanes, the through traffic lanes. So we will be instituting some arrows to allow folks to make those turn movements, but there will also be a traffic analysis done as time goes on. So if there are impacts, we already know there's an issue a block over hour, and that's on daily. But that is independent of the issues created or potentially impacts created by Kwik Trip. So the Public Works Committee has been looking at options to possibly make improvements to the daily Lincoln intersection, because that is challenged and it's offset and there's some issues there, as well as making sure that we do the right thing on the expressway. So whether it's arrows on the expressway or changing some of the queuing times or the signal timing to keep traffic moving, that's also included in that report.
How are we doing synchronizing our traffic signals in the city?
Believe it or not, all of the expressway operates off of one system. They're all timed together. Now, there are some exceptions to that in the case if there's turn arrows and if you give more timing to one signal or another. Now, if we're talking about timing of 8th Street, for example, there are times on 8th Street when I can hit every light and not have to get stopped for a red light, which is great.
Yeah.
But not often, if you've got longer traffic periods where you've got higher traffic, obviously you're being held up. But we don't have any. We only do a system traffic timing. It's very expensive, and it's something that we have to hire out for and always have every so many years. I want to say maybe every 5 at best, but it's probably longer than that. That we would do timing of other signals. So if we add timing to any one of the movements on the Lincoln Street, it throws off the timing of the rest of the system on the expressway. So we're very careful about deciding whether or not we should do that.
Okay. Interesting. Going back to the budget, is the state being realistic in your view with local units of government and the restraints they put on them? Given cost increases local governments face, and et cetera, et cetera.
I think there's an aspirational sort of austerity principle that they would love to achieve, right? And that's flat property taxes, government costs do not increase. We all live in reality. Costs increase. We have vendors that increase their costs. We've got contract providers, whether they're putting in concrete or they're paving our streets. All of those have cost increases annually. So there's no way for us to conceivably pass on a decrease, let's say, in wages to the rest of the employees to make up the cost increases elsewhere. So this morning I came from our meeting, a meeting in Point, which is our League of Municipalities. It's sort of the association that represents all the leagues and all the villages and cities in the state. And we were establishing our 2017 legislative priorities, knowing that there's the biennium budget preparation, which will follow the election. Right. The governor has issued his transportation proposal, which increases aid for places across the state. But I think the state needs to get realistic around outstate communities like ours that have moderate to slim growth year over year. So the net new construction variable, which tells us how much our budgets can increase, we have to live within some reality there. There has to be an adjustment made for communities like ours that are built out, that are surrounded by municipalities who typically are opposed to annexation. So when that happens, the city has to really focus on infill development, like our Triangle project we just talked about downtown. If we don't have enough of that infill or redevelopment of dilapidated or rundown properties, maybe some on 8th Street, for example. If we don't have infill development, new development, the city does not have the ability to finance service levels as they are today. So it will be a frank conversation. Our League of Municipalities, the group that advocates on cities and villages' behalf, that will be a frank conversation we continue to have with legislators to say, we have to provide these services. You all take advantage of them in the communities in which they go back home to. But the reality is to have that frank discussion of how you pay for it. And just to say, and so we advocate for other diverse revenue streams. Give us the ability to create, maybe it's a regional transit authority, so that way, or if there's situations where we can combine protective service capacities. So maybe it's providing services for one of our neighboring municipalities, whether it's fire or EMS services. Those types of things which enable us to make better use of our tax dollars, but also better use of our resources as a local government. We're hamstrung for doing those things, and we have to oftentimes reduce our budget when we create a fee for service. But it's also having a frank discussion internally with our department heads saying, you know what, we may provide at residents' disposal all of our staff capacity and resources. And if we've continued to cut headcount, which we're proposing possibly 2 in our budget through retirements next year, that will lose 2 additional full-time equivalents within our, or near full-time equivalents in our budget. And so at some point, the staff will not be able to provide the same level of service because we don't have the same amount of people. And so some of that holds true, a lot of it holds true in administration, because when you have residents who feel like they grow accustomed to wanting to show up to do business at City Hall at any given time, we may have to narrow our windows of service and say, here's when we can provide service. And I think the state's not obviously living within the same confines or constraints we do. They have a $313 million surplus. They're going to spend that surplus. If we have a surplus, or if we generate that, we cannot spend it, and that's a problem.
Okay. Do you have any hopes that you're going to get attentive legislative ears?
Well, we continue.
Or do we have a lot of ideologues going, no, we can't do that?
Well, I think it's education, right? It's getting the local legislators to understand that some of the restraints and restrictions are not realistic, especially on a long-term basis. They may have worked maybe in the first couple of years. They gave us Act 10, we saved some money, but with health insurance premiums, we still in this country have a group and an employer-based health plan system or healthcare system. Until we make a dramatic change to depart from that, municipalities, local government are still going to have, just like businesses, they'd be faced with the increases in costs of providing health insurance. Okay. And we have to absorb those things somehow in our budget.
Well, quickly, I want to talk to you about, I noticed in my packet a whole lot about signage, and this involves a project planned or something in the Lincoln High area. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So the Tim Latch Memorial Group has decided to finance the addition of a electronic sign at Lincoln High School. So it sort of will bisect or intersect the sign that's currently at Lincoln High School. That's just a static, non-electronic sign. And so they approached the city with a proposal, and the Planning Commission and Council approved that last night to allow the introduction of that sign. I don't recall if they're going to be able to get it in this fall yet based on timing and contractor schedule, but their hope is to have a very nice electronic reader board sign that will advertise events at the high school, but also the PAC and other things.
Okay. Oh, boy. It's been a busy time of the year for everything. Going forward, we've talked about a lot of different things, a lot of different projects. What are some of your priorities, or since we're in the fall cleanup, anything that you want to let people know about fall cleanup and the like before I let you go?
No, nothing on that front. Same procedures as previous years, and if people have questions, make sure they consult the city website. We've got schedules out there for any of the fall cleanup things. Budget-wise,
going into winter, how's the city looking in terms of snow removal and costs?
Well, it's always a wild card.
That is, and that's a big one.
We have a budget placeholder, which we allocate monies to do snow removal, but if we don't have a heavy snow year, then we do other things, some of which might be the demolition within the Easttown Plaza. I know we've got a tremendous amount of off-season projects with the hiring of our Director of Public Works, and obviously downstream having some new folks step into positions after retirements. We have a ton of priorities to accomplish and to achieve in the off-season. So the guys are going to be busy. There's no question about that. I think there's been a lot of things that have accumulated over the years, and we certainly intend to set some targets to get through those things. We've got a capital improvements plan that still is unfinished, I would say, and that includes streets and underground infrastructure, but as well as our buildings. A lot of our city buildings are all about the same age, and so we have to plan for the maintenance and the replacement of things like the elevators, whether it's the library or at City Hall. Those things are aging at the same time, and they're not cheap fixes. So we need to do a capital improvements plan to identify all of the needs that are across the city and for possible replacement.
Okay, and that all puts stresses on a budget.
It certainly does.
Okay, well, hopefully maybe someday we'll have folks in Madison realizing what those of us at the local level are dealing with.
That's right.
Okay, well, as always, I appreciate your time, and if folks want to get a hold of you, they can always contact your office, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thanks to our listeners.
Okay, and our viewers, and thank you, Your Honor, and we'll talk again next month. And that's going to do it for our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. We also thank our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media for being here this morning.